Part 3. The Economic Enslavement. Chapter 11. The Clubhouse. On the first Feminian sandstones, we were promised the fuller life, which started by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife, till our women had no more children, and the men lost reason and faith, and the gods of the copybook headings said, "The wages of sin is death." In the Carboniferous epoch, we were promised abundance for all, by robbing selected Peter to pay for collective Paul. But, though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy, and the gods of the copybook headings said, "If you don't work, you die." Then the gods of the market tumbled, and their smooth-tongued wizards withdrew, and the hearts of the meanest were humbled, and began to believe it was true, that all is not gold that glitters, and two make four, and the gods of the copybook headings limped up to explain it once more. Rudyard Kipling, The Gods of the Copybook Headings. By the end of World War I, the Rockefeller clan became convinced that they could only safeguard their vast financial empire by becoming the sole rulers of the world. Their first attempt to create a global government came with the attempt to establish a League of Nations under their control. The plan was drafted by Paul Warburg, the father of the Federal Reserve, John Foster Dulles, a Rockefeller lawyer, whose wife Janet Pomeroy Avery was John D.'s first cousin, James T. Shotwell, president of Columbia University, whose work on internationalism was sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation, Lord Robert Cecil, a leading member of the secret society of Cecil Rhodes and an agent of the Rothschilds, and Jan Smuts, the Prime Minister of South Africa, a member of the Committee of 300 and a Rothschild lackey. The setback. The League, as conceived by the trustees and espoused by President Wilson, was to establish a global forum to settle territorial disputes through arbitration and the power to enforce those settlements, to create a free trade regime, to remove all economic barriers between nations, to promote regional integration on both political and economic levels, including the welding together of North and South America, and to allow the United States to lead the way in the formation of a new world order. When Wilson submitted the treaty for ratification in June of 1919, the Senate balked. The establishment of the League, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge maintained, would make Wilson the president of the world. The setback was so personally devastating for Wilson that he suffered a severe stroke in October of 1919 that prevented him from seeking a third term in office. The meeting at the Majestic Hotel. Undeterred from the plans to form a global government, the American and British members of the Pilgrim Society met on May 30, 1919, at the Majestic Hotel in Paris to create the Institute for International Affairs, which was to have two chapters, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIF, also known as the Chatham House Study Group, as an advisory group to the British government, and the Council on Foreign Relations as a think tank for the U.S. State Department. A subsidiary organization, the Institute of Pacific Relations, was formed to deal exclusively with Far Eastern affairs. Other organizations were set up in Paris and Hamburg. The Royal Institute, which opened in London in 1920, was simply the secret society of Cecil Rhodes writ large. Its founding fathers included Lionel Curtis, Philip Kerr, Lord Robert Cecil, Arnold Toynbee, Arthur Balfour, Robert Brand, and Geoffrey Dawson. Initial funding came from the Carnegie Corporation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Rhodes Trust. RIIF became known as the Chatham House on the basis of its address at No. 4 St. James in London. The property was purchased for the group by Colonel Reuben Wells Leonard, a Canadian businessman, who named it in honor of William Pitt, the first Earl of Chatham, to whom Canadians owed their status as British subjects. At the time of his death, Baron Edmund de Rothschild spoke of the RIIA as his greatest creation. The Chatham House Rule. RIIF functioned and continues to function under this policy. When a meeting or part thereof is held under the Chatham House Rule, participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers, nor that of any other participant, may be revealed. This rule mirrored the manner in which Rhodes believed information should be shared and disseminated, clandestinely, through an elite group of decision-makers, and it intimated that the inner workings of the group operates on the Society of the Elect's original rings-within-rings model. RIIF members have included a host of British prime ministers, including Winston Churchill, Harold Macmillan, Harold Wilson, and John Major. The list of foreign dignitaries who have addressed the gatherings at the Chatham House includes the names of Mahatma Gandhi, Ronald Reagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, Nelson Mandela, Yasser Arafat, Vladimir Putin, Alan Greenspan, Kofi Annan, and Hillary Clinton. The birth of the CFR. As the Rockefellers and Morgans took the lead in the creation of the Federal Reserve, the Pilgrim Society, and the American Round Table, they also spearheaded the formation of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, on July 29, 1921. John W. Davis, the first president of the organization, was a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation. Paul Cravath, the vice president, headed the law firm that protected the Rockefeller family's interests. Russell Leffingwell, who became the first chairman, was one of Morgan's banking business partners. Edwin Gay was president of the New York Post, a newspaper owned by the Morgan Company. Hamilton Fish Armstrong, another employee of the Post, became the first editor of Foreign Affairs, the CFR monthly publication, and Elihu Root, another of Morgan's private attorneys, was named honorary president. Many of the founders also possessed strong ties to the Carnegie and Rockefeller Foundations, which provided the funding for the organization's headquarters at 58 East 68th Street in New York City, a property known as the Pratt House. John Foster Dulles, the lawyer for Standard Oil and the board chairman of the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, numbered among the CFR's founding fathers. In later life, John Foster Dulles would become Secretary of State under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, while his younger brother Alan, also a CFR founding member and Morgan lawyer, would become director of the CIA. Another founding father was Paul Warburg, who was also the founding father of the Federal Reserve System. Warburg now served as the chairman of the International Acceptance Bank, which he had organized to promote the post-war reconstruction of Europe with the Rothschilds. A sinister organization. The members of the CFR met in private and under a cloak of secrecy to establish political and economic strategies and to groom individuals for powerful governmental positions. Like the Pilgrim Society, it was an elite organization, and the recruits came from the upper echelons of society, so that it would eventually constitute the heart of the American establishment. The subversive nature of the CFR was revealed in 1957 by a Congressional Investigative Committee as follows. In the international field, foundations and an interlock among some of them and certain intermediary organizations have exercised a strong effect upon our foreign policy and upon public education in things international. This has been accomplished by vast propaganda, by supplying executives and advisors to government, and by controlling much research in this area through the power of the purse. The net result of these combined efforts has been to promote internationalism in a particular sense, a form directed toward world government and a derogation of American nationalism. The CFR has become, in essence, an agency of the United States government, and its productions are not objective, but are directed overwhelmingly at promoting the globalist concept. This subversive purpose has been verified by Foreign Affairs, the Council's own publication, which has been called the most influential periodical in print by Time magazine. In its inaugural issue, September 1922, the journal condemned the dubious doctrines expressed by such phrases of safety first and America first. In its second issue, Philip Kerr, a member of the British Round Table, declared, "Obviously, there is going to be no peace or prosperity for mankind so long as it remains divided into 50 or 60 independent states. Equally obviously, there is going to be no steady progress in civilization or self-government among the more backward peoples until some kind of international system is created which will put an end to the diplomatic struggles of every nation to make itself secure. The real problem today is that of world government." The same insistence has been resounded ad nauseum in nearly every issue of Foreign Affairs. In Reflections on Our National Purpose, an article published in the April 1972 issue, Kingman Brewster, Jr., the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain and president of Yale University, said, "Our national purpose should be to abolish American nationality and to take some risks in order to invite others to pool their sovereignty with ours." 2 years later, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Richard N. Gardner penned a piece called The Hard Road to World Order, in which he wrote, "We are witnessing an outbreak of short-sighted nationalism that seems oblivious to the economic, political, and moral implications of interdependence. The House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down." He went on to say, "An end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault." The Stranglehold. Proof of the stranglehold the CFR possesses over the federal government resides in the fact that by 2017, 20 Secretaries of State, 19 Secretaries of the Treasury, 15 Secretaries of Defense, and hundreds of other federal department heads have been CFR members, along with 21 of the 24 CIA directors and every chairman of the Federal Reserve since 1951. The name of Rex Tillerson, who was appointed Secretary of State by President Donald Trump, does not appear on the official CFR membership list. But the omission doesn't mean that Tillerson is not a member, since he may have exercised his right to keep his name from the organization's public disclosures. What's more, Tillerson served as chairman and chief executive officer of ExxonMobil, the Rockefeller Oil Company, from 2006 to 2017, and ExxonMobil is a leading corporate member and sponsor of the CFR. Similarly, Mike Pompeo, who replaced Tillerson as Trump's Secretary of State, is the only Secretary of State within the past 85 years without any known ties to the CFR. The Rockefellers triumphant. By the time of the Great Depression, the Rockefellers gained control of a lion's share of the holdings of the House of Morgan. The success of this coup, which toppled the House of Morgan, was due to an alliance that the Rockefeller family formed with such burgeoning American financial establishments as Harriman Brown and Company, which included George Herbert Walker and Prescott Bush as partners, Lehman Brothers, and Goldman Sachs, which had managed to push Kuhn, Loeb and Company into the background. The harbinger of this revolution was the Rockefellers' successful takeover of the Morgans' flagship commercial bank, Chase National Bank of New York. After the 1929 crash, Winthrop W. Aldrich, son of Senator Nelson Aldrich and brother-in-law of John D. Rockefeller, Jr., engineered a merger of his Rockefeller-controlled Equitable Trust Company into Chase Bank. From that point on, Aldrich engaged in a titanic struggle within Chase. By 1932, he managed to oust the Morgans' Chase CEO, Albert Wiggin, from office and take his place as the head of the gigantic financial firm. Chase has remained the financial headquarters of the House of Rockefeller. The study groups. The family of John D. Rockefeller now possessed control of the Federal Reserve, which they could manipulate to further their vast empire. They also obtained absolute dominance over the CFR, so that governmental policies would coincide with their interests. The policies were prepared by study groups within the CFR for implementation by the U.S. State Department. Regarding these groups, Admiral Chester Ward, a former CFR member, wrote, "Once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy, and to confound and discredit, intellectually and politically, any opposition. Indeed, the studies generated by the Council have resulted in the establishment of such international institutions as the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund." Financing for the study groups comes from the Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford Foundations, which are governed by boards of directors that are interconnected. The board members of the Rockefeller Foundation often pop up as trustees of the Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford Foundations, and vice versa. For example, CFR President John W. Davis served as a trustee for the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations, while running for president in a campaign heavily funded by Kuhn, Loeb and Company, the bank in which Paul Warburg, the founder of the Federal Reserve, was a partner. By 1960, many of the trustees of America's three leading foundations were executives from Bechtel Construction, Chase Manhattan, Kimberly-Clark, Monsanto Chemical, and other leading international business and banking firms. 12 of the 15 Rockefeller Foundation trustees, 10 of the 15 Ford Foundation trustees, and 10 of the 14 Carnegie Foundation trustees were members of the CFR. A birthday party. On July 8, 1929, John D. Rockefeller celebrated his 87th birthday at the Casements, his home in Ormond Beach, Florida. He was surrounded by his two daughters, Alta and Edith, his son John D. Rockefeller, Jr., and his grandchildren, including David, who would become the CEO of Chase Manhattan, Nelson, who would become the governor of New York and vice president of the United States, and Winthrop, who would become the governor of Arkansas. Fearful of public retribution for his exposed acts of piracy, John D. had built underground tunnels that led from his residence to the Ormond Beach Hotel and the home of his physician. But the old man's fear of poverty that he had passed on to his progeny remained far stronger than his fear of physical violence. For this reason, he had plotted one of his final crimes against humanity, an event that became known as the Great Depression.